Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Crypto Rewind, and this is just in case you missed it.
There is an economic and technological revolution underfoot. How will it affect the world, and will America be able to keep up? Today, Alvin Toffler is here. He and his wife Heidi have changed people's views about the future and present since their bestseller Future Shock was published in 1970. And they do it again with their new book, Revolutionary Wealth: How It Will Be Created and How It Will Change Our Lives. Pleasure to have you here today, Alvin.
Thank you. Thanks.
So you say a revolution in wealth is sweeping the planet. What is this revolution about?
Well, wealth used to be only a matter of agriculture. Mm-hmm. You grew a crop, you fed your family, and that was the best wealth in the world.
Yep.
Then we came to the Industrial Revolution of about starting maybe 3 or 4 centuries ago, mm-hmm. and pretty soon we discovered that to create wealth, you put up factories and people yep. worked on assembly lines, as in fact Heidi and I did after we finished university. We spent 5 years working.
Really? So that gives you an interesting perspective.
To see how the industrial society worked from the bottom. And we studied that. But now we know, and starting as far back as the mid-50s, we have been developing what we now call a knowledge-based economy and a knowledge-based society. Yep. But not very much is known about that, and that is what the function of this book is, to try to explain what do we mean by a knowledge-based society and how radically different it is and will be, not only for us, but for our kids.
Sure.
This is going to be a very strange place, but by comparison with that place that we grew up in and the place that our parents and ancestors grew up in. We're creating in the United States a new form of society. Call it a new civilization.
Well, that's pretty sweeping. So where are we going? What is this new civilization going to be like?
Well, I think what we're seeing, we don't know all the answers to that. We know that more and more economic wealth is created by knowledge, by the application of knowledge. And we have and that knowledge is not just geek knowledge. It's also knowledge of medicine, knowledge of how to manage, knowledge of 1,000 different things. But we are dependent on knowledge which is intangible. In the old economy, economics was frequently described as the science of the allocation of scarce resources. But guess what? We're dependent primarily on knowledge in the United States and in some other countries. We're primarily dependent upon knowledge, and it is not a scarce resource. I can use arithmetic. You can use arithmetic.
We don't use up the alphabet, numbers.
We don't use it up. And so what we're dealing with is a resource which is central to the new economy and which is barely understood. We don't know. I mean, somebody says, well, what do you mean by knowledge? There'll be 10,000 definitions. Sure. Somebody will say, how much is there? Who knows? We know how many bits and bytes there are floating around in the world, but we don't know how much knowledge there is. And indeed, there are all kinds of mysteries about the nature of knowledge. And yet, it is the central asset, the central resource for where we are going economically and where we will be going. And one thing we don't know, and I think this is something worth developing, we coin a word in this book, as we have in other books. We coin the word obsolege, by which we mean obsolete knowledge. And in a world in which nothing changes for centuries at a time, or very little changes, what you know in your head is more or less permanent. From the time you grow up, it stays the same, and you know what you're doing, and the old folks know even more. Right. In our society, everything is changing so rapidly that knowledge that we take for granted, that we assume we know, increasingly becomes obsolete, or as we call it, obsolege. So our heads are filled with obsolege rather than knowledge. How much of what we know about our work, about our business, about our economy, or for that matter about our kids' upbringing and medicine and so forth, how much of what we know is already obsolete or on its way to being obsolete within a month?
And what you said earlier about and now we're in a case maybe where the kids are teaching the parents.
And now we have, Margaret Mead years ago, the anthropologist, pointed out this difference between pre-generative and post-generative, the terms I think she used, and that is societies in which the young learn from the old, and then there are societies in which the old learn from the young. And that obviously is more likely to be a rapid change society, something that's moving quickly, and that is not just the same generation after generation after generation. And that's what we have.
You talk about the 3 waves in the book,
right.
And it seems as though a lot of the world these days is in the second or perhaps moving into the 3rd wave. Can you tell us more about that and why that's important and what the 3rd wave is?
If we go back to the beginnings of time, 10,000 years ago, approximately, nobody knows for sure, somebody planted the first seed. That was probably a woman. We don't know for sure, but probably a woman, because in the division of labor, women did the agriculture and the men went hunting. Probably a woman, and probably in what is now Turkey, somewhere in that region, and invented agriculture. Now, that's an incredible invention. And agriculture became the primary source of existence, and the entire nature of society, historical societies, were based on agriculture. And so what happened with the invention of agriculture was we did away more or less with nomadic and hunting and gathering communities. We stayed in one place, and we worked with our families and in the fields and so forth. 350 or so years ago, came what we call the Enlightenment. Beginning of strange new revolutionary ideas began to spread, and indeed the invention of the steam engine and the first actual practical use of the steam engine came, and suddenly we found ourselves in an industrializing world, a world of smokestacks and assembly lines, and people didn't go out to the field with the family, they went to work on the assembly line. And a very interesting thing happened about the pace of daily life, how you lived. In agriculture, the family went out together as a team to work in the fields, pick the crop or plant the seeds or what have you. If little Joe came late, well, Uncle Charlie would fill in a few minutes for him. On the assembly line, you can't come late, because if you come late, you're holding up the work of 1,000 people downstream from you. So it's very expensive if anybody is not punctual. And you have to do rote and repetitive work on that assembly line. And in fact, if you trace the development of the assembly line, you suddenly discover that people have clocks, people wear watches, all kinds of things change with that, and the speed of life increased. What has happened, and that led to what we call a historical second great wave of change in society. What we're living through now, certainly in the United States and in other parts and other countries, is a third gigantic wave of change, which we believe is at least as powerful and probably many times more significant and powerful than the Industrial Revolution itself. We're going through something absolutely historic, and people don't recognize